Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Simon, and good evening, everybody. And hope Simon didn't have raised too high expectations from my lecture. I will do my best to tell you a little bit about rewilding, which I have done for now about 35 years. And in that career, I established together with friends, several foundations and limited companies around rewilding, always trying to bring practice and vision together. I will show you some examples from the Netherlands that hopefully can inspire you for your amazing work along the River Stour as well. I'll try to share my screen. I hope this will work. Can you all see this? Oops.
That's great, Wouter.
Yeah, but I have to start here. Sorry. Yeah, this is so. As I said, I'm doing this now for about 35 years, and actually, what all that work has in common is that we have tried now to, all the time, to find partnerships with other economic sectors that could have an interest in a more natural environment. So instead of focusing on the small budgets that are available for conservation, we thought, okay, what if we can enthuse other economic sectors for nature and using actually their money for conservation in their interest. And actually that's how we started 35 years ago. And what we did in the Netherlands is mainly focused on the coastal strip, how to use nature as an ally to protecting our coast, especially for sea level rising. We worked on projects upstream of cities to store water upstream cities and avoid floods downstream. And that's what I will focus on today, how to restore our river areas in a way that they become more safe for our society, provide us with some commodities, clay, gravel even, but also became very attractive as recreational touristic areas. Often people ask, okay, how is it possible that this ideas came up in the Netherlands, which is the most crowded part of Europe? And actually the reason is that there was almost nothing left in the 70s and 80s in our country. So you could say that at that time biodiversity was at its all-time lowest in the Netherlands. So the need to do something was bigger here than wherever else in Europe. So so in the end of the 80s, we start to think about other forms of conservation that could be more productive than what we had done for 100 years and which didn't bring us so much. And we also established the first ideas about nature networks, which became later on adopted on a European scale. But yeah, so the main reason that the Netherlands became a fertile soil for this was actually because there was almost nothing left. To give you an idea, in 1986, and focusing on the river landscape, we had a chemical disaster at the Sandoz factory in Switzerland, which killed all life in the Riverine. And at the same time, our floodplains were used for very intensive agriculture. So in the end, we were left with a river system with almost no life in it, kind of dead valley. And so the response was then at that time twofold. First, cleaning the river. So the states along the Riverine started the Rhine Action Plan, actually, which was quite successful, with the Rhine at this moment one of the most clean rivers of Europe. And the second thing that we had to do was to completely change our spatial planning in a way. And that was inspired by a vision in 1986 from some visionary people. It was called Ooievaar, which means in British stork, the plant stork, about the future of our river area. And the new thing of this, the revolution actually in this plan was that we stopped actually combining nature with industrial agriculture. We said, okay, let's split these two functions let's move agricultural behind the dikes and use the floodplains for flood management, ship traffic, of course, clay mining, and rewilding. And that was a complete new idea about how to establish partnerships from a conservation perspective with actually what was with parties which till that moment were regarded as our enemies. So mining companies, water managers, till that time they were mostly destroying nature, and we found a way to cooperate with them in a way that we solved their problems in a way that the end result was very beneficial for nature. But I will tell you more about that later. Sorry, just to go back to that slide. This plan, Stork, was also focusing on some strategic areas in the Netherlands, and the most strategic one was the Gelder support, of which the Millingerwaard, I hope you see my arrow, is one of the pilot sites for rewilding in the Netherlands. But this Gelder support area, you can see it, it's the bifurcation point of the River Rhine into the Waal, and further up to the IJssel and the Lower Rhine, the three main rivers of our delta. Everything you can develop in this area has this impact downstream the whole Dutch delta. So starting here with rewilding really makes sense, and that's what we did. And what I did myself, there was a kind of land reallocation plan in one of the sites of this Gelder support area, and I took a seat in the commission that actually organized the whole process of moving the agriculture out of the floodplains and concentrate nature, flood management, and mining in the floodplains. So here and on this picture, which is actually 15 years later, on the left side you have the floodplain in a more natural state, and behind the dikes, agricultural optimizing things with hedgerows and green structures between the parcels, but on headlines, separation between agriculture on one hand and nature on the other side. And this was partly possible because in the 80s we had 3 serious summer floods, which actually caused quite a disaster for the farmers that had land in their floodplains, because their cornfields, they just couldn't harvest their corn for 3 years. Their harvest just went to Rotterdam, and there was no income from them from the floodplain. So there was an open mind from the farmers community to move out, to move away from the floodplains and to go to the other side of the dikes. And at the same time, you see on the picture on the right top that the number of farmers was fast decreasing from over 900 farmers in this area in 1950 to less than 150 years later. Actually, there are 40 left at the moment. And this dynamic within the farming society also helped us to reallocate farming sites, concentrate farmland in one part of the area, and rewild, in this case, 1,500 hectares floodplains. That was the idea, but that whole land reallocation process that lasts for about 22 years, and we were in need of pilot projects on a much shorter term, and that's what we achieved in 1990. Imagine we were explaining our plans at that time to the Minister of Water Management, and we were guiding her over the River Waal, you see here on the left side, and we were talking about this rewilding plan and she became very enthusiastic about it. But at the same time, on this specific spot where you see the 1990 figure, her ministry was just digging away some young sand dunes, which you see here on the picture on the top right. So this is what you see here on this picture is the old situation. Cornfield at that time on the left side, sheep farming on the right, a lot of barbed wire in the landscape. and her ministry was digging this sand away for infrastructural works. And just at the moment that we came along this site with the minister herself, and she asked us, okay, so actually what you want me to do is to stop this work from the ministry. And we said, yeah, if you could arrange that, you will see in 5 years an amazing river dune landscape coming up here. And actually that's what she did in a split second. She just called her director in the region, said, you have to stop this work. And she offered us our first 2.5 hectares here in 1990 to start our first pilot on rewilding in the Gelderse Poort. And you have to give you an idea, a few months later, we bought 3 horses from Poland, Koning horses. We released them in those 2.5 hectares. We chased them from one side, from the parcel to the other side. We made a movie of this. We mixed those 3 horses time and again into a stampede of hundreds of horses in the Dutch floodplains. And we showed this movie to the annual conference of WWF in the Netherlands. And then the whole story started. Then rangers from WWF started collecting money for us to make this vision possible. And within a few months, we had a few €100,000 to buy more land around this first parcel and to increase actually our pilot site, where we could ask people to join our adventure, see how it worked out in reality. Then WWF, encouraged by this first results, also decided to update this Stour plan, and also including the quality of the river itself in the floodplains. So they said, well, it would be perfect if with clay mining we could dig out all the old river gullies in the floodplains and make them streaming again. Because if you create streaming gullies in the floodplains, you enable filter feeders, which you see here on the top right, larvae of mosquitoes and flies. They can filter the algae from the river, the streaming river, make it available for fish. And by having fish in the river, you have again also food for herons, ospreys, white-tailed eagle, and so on. And so that was written down in the report Levende Rivieren, Living Rivers in British, but it's now translated, I think, in 10 languages. It's implemented in all over the world. But although the water managers in the Netherlands were very enthusiastic about the first ideas about rewilding, this streaming side channels, that was one step too far for them. They found it too risky to make such a, to make these structures in the floodplains. But then nature helped us. We had serious floods in 1993, 1995. And we had to evacuate 200,000 people in this area, billions of euros of damage. And then in a few years, the whole mindset changed within the Dutch river managers. And actually, rewilding became part of the national policy on river restoration and reducing flood risks. And this program is called Room for Rivers, and is still at this moment is implemented in more and more floodplains. Actually, the key element in this new strategy to reduce flood risks in the floodplains was to concentrate all the mining activities, the clay mining activities in the floodplain. Till that moment, it was spread everywhere. So everywhere where there was clay, mining companies, they dug out the clay, often filled the gaps again with garbage, recultivated it, and actually by doing that got more and more protests against their work, difficulties to get permits. And actually we solved their problem by saying, we will help you to get permits, but under one condition, you have to do your work only in the floodplains. Just peel off the clay layer of the floodplains and leave the landscape as it is afterwards. Let nature do the rest of the job. And actually we helped them to get the permits. Actually, in 1993, WWF signed a covenant with all the brick factories in the Netherlands to do it in this way. So since that moment, actually every brick used in the Netherlands contributes to rewilding. And by taking off the clay layer from the floodplains, we lower the floodplains, create more space for the flowing rivers, and create a very attractive starting situation for rewilding. As you see on the pictures here on the right side, this is how it works in theory, and on the left side how it works in practice. To give you an idea, our rivers bring us every year 1.5 times more clay than we actually at this moment use for our buildings. So there's still a surplus of clay available. It's really a renewable commodity to use, and at the same time actually use it to buy land from farmers, change it into nature. So it's also the engine behind the land transition. It lowers the floodplain, make it safer for floods, and of course brings bricks to new buildings. Well, then we started with all kind of plans for floodplains, like here in the Millingerwaard. It's one of the, as I said, it's about 750 hectares of floodplain, part of the Gelderse Poort. On the top right, you see the original situation, how it looked like in the agricultural period, quite intensive farming. Then with clay mining, we took off the clay layer, and in the end, here you see still work in progress. The landscape slowly changes into a kind of wetland. To give you an idea, so we, with clay mining, we transfer about 100 hectares per year from farmland into nature. And then after the machines are gone from the mining companies, then nature takes over. And every flood brings sediment, sand, clay. Sometimes some small spots, there's erosion, but as we are living in the delta, mostly it's sedimentation of clay and sand. And when it's saturated with the water, you get drift sands that easily form new landscapes, as you see on this bigger picture. And on the bottom right, you see if the sand is deposited there and wind gets grip on it, you get river dunes, and they grow with about 10 centimeters a year, and yeah, forming real river dunes, which we didn't have for centuries. The river not only brings clay and sand, but also life. Seeds of many hundreds of plant species from France, Germany, Switzerland to the Dutch Delta. But here what you see, these are mushrooms also brought by the river. And in those mushrooms, we found thousands of insects brought there from upstream areas. And so, as I said, the river also brings a lot of life. So in areas which till that time only had one species, for example, corn or grassland, now we see after 35, 40 years, we see thousands of species coming back in these floodplains. We started with, as I said, with the purchase of some land, some dozens of hectares in this part of the Millingerwaard. But our, for the rest, we mainly created arrangements with other landowners in the area, all with their own interest participating in this rewilding idea. Some because they had a mining company, some because they had a tea garden and thought about visitors to attract them. Other ones because of, there are areas owned by the water management department that offered them also for the rewilding story. And there were farmers that changed their job from farming into the management of the herds, which I will explain later. So we had, but so it became a network of a few dozens of landowners that all participated in this rewilding project, all from their own interest. What we learned actually, because we started more or less from scratch in the Netherlands, but we had some reference areas in neighboring countries, in France partly, but also we went to Poland to look at similar areas in a more natural state. And we found some interesting thing. Old gullies like you have here in the Millingowaard, and they, if you dig them out, what you see is that in a natural situation, often these side gullies, they are closed on the upper side, but still open on downside in the floodplain. In this case, it's about 6-7 kilometers between the top of this new excavated gully and the opening to the river downstream, which means because the river itself here is about, the river flow is from the right side to the left side. The level here is about 17 centimeters higher than downstream, which means that the water level here, which is the same as the water level in the river downstream, the water level here is 70 centimeters lower here at this point and at this point and at this point than here in the river, which causes a flow through the soil of water, river water, which is cleaned by the soil, purified by the soil. So in the end, you get very clean water streams in your eutrophic floodplain, giving space to a complete different set of species, dragonflies, fish, whatever. So making use of these kind of insights that shaped our new rewilded floodplains. In this case, we have a lot of water violets in the floodplain coming back because of this pure water. In other floodplains, we just stopped the drainage systems. We just closed the drainage systems after, and so that after a flood, you can imagine in our agricultural situation, the farmers want to get rid of the water as soon as possible. But now we own it, or now in the rewilded situation, we can just close the drainage systems and get these new floodplain ecosystems, which attract a lot of waders, spoonbills, egrets, storks, and complete new set of species that we were almost forgotten in our country. But we also introduced some species. I understood you will also have a lecture about beaver. Well, we, of course, our last beaver was, I think, killed about 150 years ago. There was no way that they could recolonize the Netherlands themselves. So we decided, because of their importance for the ecosystem, to bring some beaver back in 1994. Actually, we released 54 animals in this area. And well, here you see the impact they have on the landscape. But actually, at this moment, we have about 4,000 in the Netherlands, and they really create new landscapes by building their dams, their burrows, they're creating lakes. They keep water upstream in a way that it also functions like a climate buffer in a way. So animals that really change the landscape can be regarded as architects. And with beaver, actually, you get again hundreds of other species back in your system because of the diversity in types of water and so on. So this is rewilding is about letting nature do the job, but sometimes you have to give nature its tools back to do the job, and beaver is one of those tools. We also reintroduced some other species, but that was more because of their symbolic value. So we brought back sturgeon in the river Rhine and otter. Sturgeon got extinct in the 50s in the Netherlands, but now it's coming back again. Again, we had to reintroduce them from the last population in France, which was saved by the French conservationists. And otter, actually, we restocked a new population that came back, but had a very poor genetic basis. We brought back some other otters from different populations to actually to broaden the genetic diversity of otters in this area. And yeah, doing well at the moment. But maybe the most important reintroductions we did were about the large herbivores. And you have to, if you think about European landscapes in the natural state, you can easily assume that almost 50% of our biodiversity is more or less linked to the role of large herbivores. the way they graze the landscape, trample the soil, the way their shit, their carcasses, their wallowing sites, the bull pits, that all creates a lot of diversity in the landscape, of which tens of thousands of species benefit. So that's what an important step that we did in these areas. So after changing farmland into in a rewilding state, giving the river, let the rivers shape the landscapes afterwards. Let grazing herds do the fine tuning. That's what we did in the Gelderse Poort and in other areas. Here you see, for example, this is the landscape 10 years after it was a cornfield. So you can't almost not recognize the landscape, but this was just a one species landscape, corn. And now there's about 500-600 species of flowers, maybe more than 1,000 insect species. And yeah, this is just the combination of river dynamics and herbivory grazing. There's also a maybe interesting aspect on this. So on top here, I show you 3 pictures of how normally European landscapes look like. Even in the forest, we have sharp gradients between, sharp borders between parcels. We have sharp borders between bushes, arable fields, grasslands, heathlands. And that's how we shaped our landscapes as human beings. But that's how nature shapes its landscapes. This is the 2 pictures on the down below. This is full of gradients. This is just every, so yeah, there's only diversity what you see in the area. So, and why is this so important? Well, now with climate change, we have to deal with moving climate zones in a pace of 4 kilometers a year to the north. Doesn't sound too much, but it's 11 meters a day. So every small insect or every small flower, in theory, has to move 11 meters a day to the north to keep pace with the shifting climate zones. Well, in a landscape like these ones, every few days you meet a hard border between in your migration process. In these natural landscapes, these are much more permeable, I say it, for migrating species than our cultural landscapes. So natural landscapes are also, from that perspective, very attractive for species to move with climate change. Well, just an aspect people don't know. Another thing which we found out in the rewilding the rivers, that on top you see the technical way how we protected our dikes. But we also found out that with forest in the floodplains, they function as breakwaters. So with forest in front of the dike can be lower. So you really save costs by having willows, poplars as breakwaters in front of your dike. Just to mention some aspects. Well, having those forests actually in our floodplains, that was quite unexpected, because we thought poplars would come back, willows would come back, and in the end, oaks, ashes, and so on. But actually, scientists in the 90s proved that there was no way that forests would come back to our floodplains, because they were so fertile, those soils, that we will get, it would be completely covered by nettles. And if there was just one single tree coming above those nettles, it will be grazed by our herbivores. So the predictions of scientists was that it will not bring us anything, those rewilding practices, which in a way relaxed the water managers, because if there was no forest in the floodplains, there was also little obstruction for the floods. So the water managers were quite relaxed with those scientific outcomes, but reality was completely different. The forest exploded. So there was forest coming up everywhere. So here you see again the milling of art after 10, 15 years. You see forest coming up everywhere. Here we had the river dunes coming up. So there was a small downside from our rewilding plans, that was that the water managers, after 20 years, asked us to do something because to keep the area still open for floods, to keep the floods risk low. And that's why I say it's never finished. So we had to adopt the original plan to the new situation with a lot of forest and a lot of river dunes. And what we did actually, we oversized, we oversized this gully. And that's actually what's still going on now, so that we don't have to do anything on the forest and the dunes. So we can keep the gullies, the dunes, the forest, but we had to oversize this single gully to compensate for the obstruction in the forest and the dunes. Just an example to say rewilding is a solution for other partners, but the solution of yesterday is not necessarily the solution of tomorrow. And you have to be alert every time. Climate is changing, society is changing, nature is changing, and you have to adapt constantly your ideas to fit with those new situations. But what I said, so we have solved that single thing, but as I said, in the meantime, Room for Rivers became our national policy, and here on this map you see all the projects that happened since this policy was adopted. The blue ones are in the Rhine system, the red ones in the Meuse system, all projects that actually gave more room for rivers and shaped new landscapes. I want to give you a small introduction on the other big project we did in the Netherlands. It's about the border Meuse. It's a border river between the Netherlands and Belgium. It's much smaller than the Rhine, but it's the only gravel river we have in the Netherlands. It's an area that had the obligation still to provide our national government with 55 million tons of gravel. Until the 90s, that was still done in deep excavations, again with a lot of protests from local societies. And what we did here in this case, we decided to stop these deep gravel pits and broaden the border Meuse from a small channel, what it was, about 60 meters broad, to a river, a braiding river of sometimes more than 1 kilometer broad. And that idea was already established in 1989 by our company. But again, the water management was not that enthusiastic. But as I said here as well, 1993, 1995, big floods, 2 billion euros damage. And then suddenly this whole plan became accepted and became one of the biggest infrastructural projects along the rivers in the last decades in the Netherlands. So 45 kilometers of river, 55 million tons of gravel excavated, but in a sufficient way, and leaving a landscape here down on the right, a new braiding river. Here you have another picture of this new situation with a lot of wildlife come back as well. So this is how the border Meuse looked like last year. Otter coming back, beaver, egrets. We do monitoring of our plants. So here I give you an example of the development of, in this case, typical rare river plants. This is how that developed in about 15 years. You see the original situation in some floodplains here after 15 years. This is only the most endangered species, so the most typical plants for river floodplains. And here it's compared with those few floodplains that are still in agricultural use. This is again the current value of the rewilded floodplains with their endangered species, and here the same species in the last agricultural floodplains. So it's so there are a lot of reports from insects, plants, birds, mammals of the rewilding areas in the Netherlands. I like it, but I can tell you it's not most important reason that this new strategy became popular under the people in the Netherlands. I think the main reason is that we also opened those floodplains for everybody, actually, on bike or hiking people, even outside footpaths, and everybody can go wherever he wants as long as it's not with an engine. We developed special wheelchairs, off the road wheelchairs for disabled people. We helped ferries to start their business, tea gardens, bed and breakfast. Again, the Milling of Art, the floodplain where I was as a young boy, when I visited that area when I was 15 years old, maybe there were 100 people a year going to that area, just the farmers who had their properties there. At this moment, there are more than 250,000 visitors a year, contributing to a complete new economy along the Riverine. But we also have to learn more or less people how to deal with these, especially also with these large herbivores. There's no fences anymore in the area. We removed thousands of kilometers of barbed wire, so people are in the same area with the herds of cattle, horses, and they have to learn to live with them, keep distance, understand their behavior, be alert. But that process that happened the last 20-25 years, and these animals just are completely accepted now as part of the ecosystem again. Very important as well to get children enthusiastic about this, as it's their future, their nature in the future. And I think we went with about 150,000 children out in the field in this area. For many of them, it was just the first time ever that they came in nature, just leaving their screens at home, going out. And as we all know, it's good for their physical, mental, and emotional health. And actually, that's also, I think, a big contribution of rewilding in these areas, open for public, open for children to develop themselves. But we also do a lot of education on natural processes, rewilding, in this case, circle of life, show students in this case how important carcasses are in nature as a source of food, also for hundreds of species of beetles, flies, and so on, raven, vultures. It's all coming back, and students like to get informed about that. We have set up our own filming company, Dwaalfilm, which actually means digital roaming, more or less. And we produce about 200 small videos, clips, one half minute, about specific areas, specific natural processes, specific animals that play a key role in the rewilding story. So I think, as I said, more than 200 films. I think a few million visitors already that can wandering through nature from their chair. Also important to involve people in the rewilding of the areas themselves. So as I said, we removed about tens of thousands of kilometers of barbed wire, and we always, if we do that, we don't let the company doing that, but we invite people from the area to help us removing the fences. By doing that, actually, it becomes from day one their area. They create their own freedom, literally. And so this is a very smart way to get people involved from the beginning. Also important to get the important persons in your area involved, the mayors, the deputies, and so on. So every new area, every release of a herd, some herds we even release several times to get the mayor and deputy both satisfied. But if we release 10 beavers, we invite 10 important persons to release each one beaver. So, as we say in the Netherlands, success has a lot of mothers and fathers, but you can arrange that. So that's what we do. Every time that we have a party, we invite important people from all over the place to do some nice things and get the pictures for their offices by releasing whatever. We even got one. We tried to set up a chain of wilderness cafes in our areas. So we established in our most important along our most important rewilding areas. We bought some cafes, old restaurants, old windmills, and so on to establish what we call wilderness cafe, place with a low threshold where you can eat, drink, and get informed about the rewilding area on the other side of the building. Well, nice idea, but it failed a little bit because we couldn't, we didn't manage to get a profit out of it as an NGO. So we learned this: you should not do this yourself. You should just outsource this, and that's what we did in the end. So the wilderness cafes are not longer ours, but are exploited by commercial parties to our areas. But again, it was an idea to lower the threshold between our rewilding areas and the local population. Well, that's what we did actually. Besides setting up our own businesses, also helped startups in the areas to create bed and breakfasts, ferries, camping sites, and so on. And only in the Gelderse Poort area, which is about 25,000 hectares, 5,000 hectares rewilded, we set up some dozens of companies, creating more than 250 extra jobs in the area. More than 1.5 million people visiting the area on a yearly basis, spending more than 25 million euros. So these are just figures of the Gelderse Poort, it's one of the most important rewilding areas that it is, but still, it's we're talking really about a new economy in our river floodplains. And a quite unexpected thing. So till a few years ago, we thought that actually the role for water management was important, the added value to mining, to drink water companies, to the recreational sector. But what we found out actually that in around rewilding areas, the value of real estate became 10 times higher than in areas without rewilding. And maybe that doesn't sound too much, but I can tell you that gives a lot of extra tax income for local communities. So having a higher value of your houses, your real estate, actually you generate income also for local communities via tax money, which they can reinvest in green infrastructure, in facilities for the ecotourism and so on. And that's actually an unexpected, as it's called here, bycatch of rewilding. Ending now the story of the Gelderse Poort. It all actually culminated. So as I said, we have rewilded a few dozens of floodplains in this area. But the final thing was to get the big city downstream, the Gelderse Poort, Nijmegen. It's a city of about 170,000 people, which had actually was a bottleneck in the river system, because this is an artist impression on the left side, but the original river is just this stream. And with climate change, it was expected that the city of Nijmegen would be flooded more and more because of climate change, or they should again here make higher dikes in front of the city, which is very unattractive because this is the main boulevard of the city. So what happened here, actually, as part of the Room for Rivers plan, we created a second river in the center, in the heart of the city of Nijmegen. So this is the plan. Here it's already done a few years later. And here is actually the new island that is now, which has been created between the two river gullies, which become a kind of new heart of the city. This city, which lived for decades with its back to the river, has now embraced actually the new river, the new gully, the new island, celebrating big parties now. Every few weeks there's a lot to do. If there's not a party, it's just graced by free roaming herds of cattle. But yeah, it's really functioning as a rewilding site in the heart of the city and contributing to also the reducing of the reduction of the flood risk. So 320 million euros this project, but we expect that these costs will be will be brought back in savings within 10 years. And why do we think that? Because in the other project, the border Meuse, I just told you a little bit about that. We had this summer the highest water ever, a flood of we have never seen before in this area, with a lot of damage upstream and downstream the border Meuse area, a lot of victims as well, especially in Germany. But the border Meuse itself had no damage at all. So where in 1993 we had about 2 billion euros damage from the flood at that time, now with even higher flood, there was no damage at all. So here you see actually in a nutshell how rewilding not only brings new attractive landscapes, also contributes to our source of commodities, but really save us for high floods and saving costs in that way. Well, closing my lecture. So all these landscapes, they look pretty wild, and sometimes people say this is the new wilderness. It's not. It's really a cultural landscape. Every square meter of these floodplains is coming from the drawing board. It's nature by design in a way. Every meter we have decided what to do with clay mining but after the initial works, nature is taking over. That's true, and shaping the final landscape. But as I said, it's every choice every square meter is the result of a choice to reconnect nature with modern socioeconomic issues, and in that way, I think it's really a cultural landscape. And this is a drawing that more or less expressed, in a nutshell, my whole story. I would say after hundreds of thousands of years of being part of nature as hunters and gatherers, and about 10,000 years of being farmers, where all the elements of nature became more or less disconnected, actually our challenge for the future is to reconnect modern society with wilder nature in a way that nature becomes at the heart of our society, being an ally in solving, as I said, issues that we face day to day in our modern society. That's more or less what I want to tell you, hoping it will raise a lot of questions which we can use to dive further in this stuff. Thank you so much.
That's wonderful, Wouter. Thank you so much. Yeah, really, really rich. I particularly like the Dutch approach to celebrating and having parties at every opportunity. I think that's really key. Wow, yeah, just really, really immensely inspiring. And I think, I'm sure everyone would agree with that, but particularly for myself, positioned where we are in this project with a bit of an understanding of what could be possible, and kind of really seeing what you achieved is immensely inspiring. So but let's open the floor to some questions. I've had one question coming in on a direct message, so I might invite Paul, if you'd like to turn your mic off and question, go for it. If not, I'm happy to read it out, but by all means. Okay, so this is a question to you, Wouter. How hard was it to get the government, then landowners, stakeholders, and then the public on side? And how quick or slow was that process? And what were the key lessons learned there? And then just, I guess, around this, that you just picked up on the flooding, that disaster, how key was that to major progress and success? And any points on the kind of population density, and whether many people locally that had issues or inputted into the project as well. So quite a few questions there. I can actually copy and paste that into the chat, then you can pick it apart. But yeah, anything.
Yeah, shall I answer on these questions?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So yeah, it was very, depending on what stakeholders we're talking about, it was very different. So as I said, the Ministry of Water Management was actually one of the first who adopted our ideas in general. But yes, indeed, the floods of 1993 and 1995 really speed up the process and made it a national policy, as I said. But even if that didn't happen, I think we would have rewilded dozens of floodplains as well. But yeah, then really the process speeded up. We got the mining industry on our side very fast, because we opened again the possibility for them to get permits. But of course, they had to do their job in a different way than they did before. The farmers were quite enthusiastic, actually, but yeah, especially after the summer floods of the 80s. But yeah, they because we also helped them to improve their farmlands on other spots in those reallocation processes. Actually, the most difficult part for us was the conservation world. So coming myself from an ecological background, I thought that would have been the most easy part to convince, but they really distrusted the whole situation. As I said, they really thought that we were dealing with the enemies and were putting nature at risk in a way. And it maybe took us 10 years to convince them that that what we did really was also in the benefit for the benefit of nature. And what played a key role in our work was that we from the beginning had pilot projects to show people what rewilding was about. And although they were very small, a few hectares, we invited people from everywhere to look with us what happened there, how the river brought seeds, insects, how first animals came back themselves, how the impact was of the free roaming herds. Combining vision and practice, that really helped us to convince more and more people that what we were telling was just not just a vision, but also had a meaning in practice. And the local population, that's interesting to see, though. When we started, there were really, they put big signs on the dike against us. So move out, guys, from the city. Don't bring us just nettles and willows and for our valuable farmland. And so it cost us some time to take them on board, with an important role for the children, by the way. The children were the first group of local people that became enthusiastic about these free nature reserves. But interesting enough, the same people who protested against rewilding in the beginning were the people who protested when we had to oversize that gully in the river in the Millingavaart to compensate for forest. They were the same people protested against that measure, because they in those 10-15 years in between, they started to love the new nature. And the same people are doing now big business on ecotourism, which is connected to the rewilding side. So you see, but I'm talking about 35 years. So protests in the beginning, then still quite conservative to keep the rewilding side as it was, and then in the end benefit from it as an entrepreneur. A lot of questions, very good.
Yeah, some questions coming in. Something I just wanted to pick up on, Wouter.
Yeah, I see many. This is an important one. So, indeed, many visitors and so.
Yes, that was what I was going to say.
As I said, so going from 50 visitors to 250,000, and a lot of people with a dog, a lot of them with a dog without a leash. So indeed, in some areas we had to give up breeding birds on the ground. But we deliberately did that actually for the sake of the acceptance of the local people of the area. And because at the same time, on the other side of the river, we had islands where people can't come. And we have massive breeding colonies of plovers, of avocet, of terns, gulls. So, but yes, in some places we had to make this compromise, and yeah, yeah, it was, we paid the price for opening the area for people. Yeah.
Yeah, because there is that's definitely a concern of in a lot of the workshops that we've been having. People are saying, yes, we want this to be for nature, but how can people and nature coexist? So from our perspective, it was really great to see those slides of people with iconic ponies, and are there any adverse impacts from your perspective, where you seem to see a good kind of coexistence of people?
Yeah, but it all depends on size. So if you can't have 250,000 people just on 5 hectares.
Of course.
But in this case, we're talking about thousands and thousands of hectares. So you can create a kind of zonation between those areas where people can just roam freely, and those places where, islands or areas where it's impossible to go there. So, but yeah, you need some size to make that zonation.
Yeah.
Yep.
Great.
But it's easier, again, it's easier to explain to a government that we need more nature because there's so much interest from people, than put signs that it's forbidden to go there and then ask for more nature, because then people don't see the benefit for themselves to have more nature. Maybe it sounds a little bit, it's obvious maybe, but allowing people to go there also creates big support for more nature. So yeah, it's should not be too afraid to invite people to your areas.
Brilliant. And there's just a question here about how did you choose the areas to focus on, or how did you know the areas that you'd have the most impact? Or was that just because that first parcel of land, that first 2 hectares, was just all you had available?
Well, in a larger scale, of course, it was the focus on this top of the delta as a strategic area, and then further down, it was just which opportunity popped up. So it could have been an area 5 kilometers downstream or 5 kilometers upstream. But it's also a kind of strategy. We were quite opportunistic there. So the first years we just took every opportunity that popped up and started our pilot sites. And it's also because sometimes processes go a little bit slower on one side, then you can move to an alternative place to tell your story. So it's always good to have alternatives available in a general vision with pilot sites. Anyway.
Thank you. And then just one on the funding. This is obviously a key area that we're trying to consider. How do we deliver this project? What does it look like? How do we finance it, fund it? And Martin's written here, it seems clear how the capital construction works were funded, i.e. from the water companies, the mining companies, or the municipalities. But what about the day-to-day management costs? The education, the outreach, engaging with the public, even moving the animals, the grazing, etc.
Yeah, that could have been done smarter than we have done. But indeed, so the basic finance is coming from other sectors. So for example, this €1 billion project along the border Meuse didn't cost us €1 single of tax money. It was just actually paid by the gravel industry. Same for the transition of farmland to nature by the clay industry. But the management, it's paid by the government. It's mostly state forestry in the Netherlands, or big private companies that manage the land, maybe sometimes using subsidies for that. But you, and that's what we try to do in Rewilding Europe. It could be arranged in a more clever way that actually that you link the income side to the management costs. So that you, for example, as I said, just in the Gelder support, we generate a few million euros a year for local communities via this real estate tax. Well, that could be used to pay for the management of the rewilding sites, which is not the case at this moment. We have in the Millingerwaard, we have a tea garden with more than 50,000 visitors. They all pay €6 at the entrance. If this tea garden just from those €6 pays 10 or 20 cents to the management of the Millingerwaard, it's enough. But it is not done from the beginning, so it's you can't ask them now. But in Rewilding Europe, we try to connect investments in startups, in local economies directly to the management of the rewilding area. Could be via carbon credits, could be avoided costs of wildfires. So there are, but it's good to think about, to connect. So it's that you could say there's money enough, but how to organize it in favor of your nature area or your rewild area? That's the big question.
Thank you. One here from Greg. Did you do the baseline surveys? I mean, I think you might have covered this on that slide. And what was the change in the variety and abundance of mammals and birds, etc.? Might have shown that with the with those graphs.
Yeah, that was just an example, but there's monitoring on a yearly basis of all birds, almost all mammals, butterflies, dragonflies, plants. And yeah, it shows really a steep increase of species. You can imagine it was just cornfield or monocultures of grassland. If you start creating river dunes, forests, streaming gullies with quite clean water, yeah, what do you expect? So we have now up to the level of white-tailed eagles, wolves, wildcats, pine martens. That's the level we already, black stork, we already have in our rewilding areas. So yeah, it's still not fast enough, but if you would ask me this question 20 years ago and talking about wolves, I would never have expected that we would have them had in 2020 or 2021.
That is truly wonderful to hear, actually. Just a question here also, did you take inspiration from earlier rewilding projects such as, I won't be able to pronounce that, Seaspicus Dune Ecology at Him Park and Dune. Sorry, that was terrible.
yeah. I can look at it. Sorry, Seaspicus, Him Park, the Tenella Plus, Fornestein. Ah, yeah. Okay, yeah. I know this project. It's very inspiring, but yeah, it's a different scale and not so much related. So so you have nature restoration projects. Maybe yeah, it's just about nature recovery in a good way, which is here the case. But I think for rewilding, is special thing is that we try to reconnect with, as I said, with quite strong economic sectors and making it also their interest to give nature more space to rewild the landscape. I think that's really different from what was done before. And with, so I think really that started in 1986 with this Plan Stork. That was the first time that this connection was made. And all the initiatives before were still in a more sectoral setting, just conservation or restoration of nature, which is perfect, but it misses one dimension of scaling. Oh yeah, here did the Nijmegen dividing project involve any loss of houses or buildings? Yet we had to remove 54 houses in this, on the place of the side channel. Or yeah, some houses were just taken and moved to another site, so on wheels. So that was part of the 320 million euros cost, was removing those 54 houses.
Yeah.
But yeah, but it was not a big deal actually. And I don't think you can find one single person in Nijmegen who complains about this measure. It also, I think Al Gore mentioned this city as the example of how, as a city, you can reconnect with the river, save your how to adapt to climate change in a very inspiring way. Anyway.
Yeah, that's I mean, hopefully we've got some leverage there with having looked at the most recent flood maps for the area of this park. I mean, it's quite extensive, the predicted flood modeling for climate change. So hopefully that gives us some leverage to push this sort of agenda.
The animals, I see a question about the animals. Are they truly wild or are they managed? They are managed. So, but we have some exemptions from the legislation. So the animals, so they can roam freely in areas of sometimes 1,000, 1,500 hectares along the river. But in the end, there's a fence. But we have the possibility to, we don't have to ear tag them within 7 days after birth, which is very practical. So we can do that only once a year, and normally that's at the end of the harshest season, which in our area it's the winter. So at the end of the winter, we attract the herd with some hay, and then the calves are tagged, so we don't have to disturb the herd in the rest of the year. So that's one thing. Then in some areas, it's allowed to leave carcasses out in the field as long as they are not on the path or close to the road. So if they are in a distant place where it's difficult to remove it, it's allowed to leave the carcasses there. So that's also why we have now raven and white-tailed eagle in the areas. And it's also possible to, if an animal is injured or whatever, it's possible to shoot it in the field and bring it to the slaughterhouse. So not necessarily all animals have to be transported before they are killed in the slaughterhouse, which I think from an animal welfare point of view is much better than catching them, transport, and kill them in the slaughterhouse. So you can also, in some areas, shoot them in the field. Anyway, but there are livestock. We have to take care of them. It's not allowed to let them suffering in a harsh winter. So you have to feed them in those times, which normally doesn't happen because the carrying capacity of the area should be enough to harvest the herds. But if there's lack of food, you have to feed them. And afterwards, that's then the consequence of it, you remove part of the herd to another area, could be in the Netherlands, could be somewhere else in Europe, or to a slaughterhouse, and sell the meat as wilderness meat, which is a big demand for.
There's one here, important for rewilding space, but the Stour Valley Park area is more house building, connecting to existing sewage works that cannot deal with the waste, so now polluting the River Stour and gridlock on the roads. Yes, I mean, these are some major concerns. The pressures of house building in the area, huge demands for housing. I think, looking at the floodplain, which is the area of the park predominantly, we can't put houses there anyway. So I think that the house building can be a mechanism to help deliver this project, if you like. I think sewage is an interesting one. I've actually got a talk on the power of plants in a couple of weeks. But Wouter, do you have any comments from the projects in Holland, the water companies, any benefits from them around the releasing water or effluent into the landscape, into sort of these wetlands, if you like, as a way of naturally cleaning and filtering out
Yeah, but the most important thing, I think, after this Sandos disaster in 1986 is actually, all the Rhine states have agreed on, improving their sewage systems in a way. Actually, what I said, that actually the Rhine at this moment is a very clean river. It's one of the biggest rivers of Europe, but it's very clean, with more than 45 species of fish actually at the moment, salmon in it, trout in it. Partly also financed by the city of Rotterdam, by the way. You can imagine that the harbor of Rotterdam, that was the end of this polluted river. So all the sediment, polluted sediment, it became a big cost for Rotterdam. So I think they invested 2 billion euros in cleaning up the Rhine River, just for their own, again, for their own interests, to lower the cost of cleaning the soil in Rotterdam itself. And so actually, yeah, I would almost say if a big river as the Rhine can clean itself, then the Stour River should be a piece of cake.
That's what we like to hear.
And house building, yeah, of course, we built tens of thousands of houses in the same region on the other side of the dike. And actually the brokers, they advertise with the surroundings of the rewilding area to sell houses. It's but of course in the area, in the floodplains themselves, it's not possible anymore to build whatever. So actually we removed houses, removed factories from the floodplains to give space to a river, but to create an environment for the people who live nearby. So we have there are 20 million people living within 1 hour from the Gelderse Poort. So to give you an idea about the density of the population.
Yeah.
So I think, and therefore it's nice to have these examples in the Netherlands, so that you can see that even in such a big, densely crowded part of Europe, you can do these kind of things. Of course, with some limits, so that there are a lot of limits still for rewilding in these areas, but also a lot of benefits, and we can show you how that could work out.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I had one quick question on, you showed some of that imagery where I think it was the clay had been stripped away. And at that point, is your strategy essentially just to walk away and just let the seed, let the mushrooms, let the river do whatever it needs to do, and all of that life to start to kind of kickstart? There's no intervention, there's no, great.
But you have to understand that every year there's a next centimeter of clay on the land after a flood.
Sure.
After 100 years, you have again 1 meter of clay on your floodplain. So that's why I'm calling it a renewable commodity. Mm-hmm. So to keep the flood risk low, we will have to dig off the clay layer every 200 years, maybe.
Right.
So it's also this understanding of how this works in the long term. But yeah, it's brought there by the river for free, our main building material. And actually, we should shift, in our opinion, from concrete and chalk stone to clay bricks, because this is a renewable source, where gravel and chalk is not. So actually we did a campaign with the WWF and the brick factories to exchange concrete walls, inner walls in our buildings, by Porizo. It's a ceramic product made from clay. Anyway, so you have to, every time you have to think about how can nature become part of a solution for somebody else. Mm-hmm. And then, that's actually what we are doing. Yeah.
Wonderful. Very inspiring. Thank you. So any other questions before we possibly wrap up just a few minutes ahead of time? Any other questions from the room? I'll just say it's you. I can see Jim's popped up there. He's another landscape architect who's helping out on this project, and we love to specify clay brick pavers And you know, obviously the Dutch are a huge advocate of that. So yeah, I am too.
It was a pleasure. Thank you
Great
for inviting me.
Wouter, thank you. That's been truly inspirational. Really exciting to see your work, and I'm sure we'll be in touch about how do we take this forward, or when can we come and collect some ponies.
Exactly. Yeah, you're welcome, of course. Yeah, please visit our areas, and yeah, and I love to show you in real life how it looks like, and yeah, meet some people in the area that can tell you the stories from their perspective, from the farmer's perspective, from the clay mining perspective. So it could help you as well to, or if people if you have to convince, for example, water managers or people from the tourism sector, or as I said, real estate companies, yeah, we can bring them in contact with their colleagues here in the Netherlands.
Wonderful, thank you.
Well, good luck with your project.
Very much.
Yeah.
And for everyone else, please do join our mailing list on stourvalleypark.uk, and yeah, come to further talks, and we hope to hear from you again soon. Thanks, Wouter.
Okay, bye-bye.